head pointers is not null, we just allocate the block. We're done. Okay? But what if the head of the list is empty? Okay? Did you guys have fun with empty lists this last couple of weeks? Yeah. Okay. No, I didn't have fun, but I dealt with them, yes. Okay. All right. So, conceptually, this is how it works, and this is how we want it to work. Our request is going to come in, and it's going to ask for the optimal size, and it's going to either get the optimal size or an error indicating that there is no memory available. Okay? It's not going to say, I don't have the right size, why don't you go look somewhere else? No. Okay? It will only return an error. Okay? And in malloc, how do we know that our request failed?
Returns null.
It returns null, okay, which is an invalid address. Okay? So we don't want malloc to just say, oh, you wanted 84 bytes? Well, the particular queue I would have gotten that from is empty, so oh well, too bad, sucks to be you. It's not the way it's going to work. What we're going to tell the system internally now is, if there's not a block there that's of the right optimal size, go make one. Okay? Go make one. And so how is this going to work? The queues themselves are going to manage this. It's not going to be malloc. What's going to happen is we go into this queue and it says, hey, is there anything there? Let's say the queue is empty. What it's going to do is ask the next queue up in the list, give me one of your blocks. And if it has a block, it will take that block, the bigger block. How much bigger is it than the current queue? Twice as big. So we can turn that into 2 blocks of the correct size, can't we? Keep one, give the one to the allocator. 2 queue checks. But what if the one above us doesn't have a free? It's going to ask the queue above it. So the queues only know about the queue above and below. Okay? When I ask, so if I'm going to ask the queue above, and that queue also doesn't have a head pointer, it's not going to return until either it does not have a block, in which case it cannot create one, okay, so it'll return null, or it returns the block of the correct size. Okay? So any one queue just has to be prepared to either hand one of their blocks down to the next lower queue, or request a block from the next higher queue. So the queues themselves are very, very simple in terms of their management. Okay? If I get a block from one above, I just need to break it in half. Okay? So the way that would look now is I have a bigger block. This is supposed to be twice as big. And we're going to break it in half. The way this algorithm works, though, we have to track these halves. So this is called the left, and this is called the right. Now, based on addresses in memory, the left buddy, this is where the word buddy comes from. The left buddy is adjacent to the right buddy, but is at lower addresses. But it's adjacent. Okay. So we're going to break that in half. One of those is going to be handed out to malloc. Off it goes. Notice we have a fixed number of queues, so we can only ask this question a fixed number of times. Okay, so it's order 1. Now, how many of you see an opportunity for improvement here? Okay. This looks like the holes problem that we saw before, but what if there's more than enough memory to satisfy this request, but it's all on queues below us? Okay. So we have a technique. So this breaking them apart is fragmenting them or splitting them. Buddy system calls them splits. Okay, which is the same as fragments, but we're just splitting them in half. Okay. But there's times when we're going to want to bring those buddies back together and move them to the next highest list. Otherwise, over time, we could wind up pushing all the blocks down to very small sizes, and then we can't allocate anything. Okay? So the way we want to do this is to remember that the world is comprised of left and rights. Okay? Now, let's say we put this down, the left block. This is the left block that's still out on this cube. We split that one in half. It's the original block. It had a left, it has a left and a right. It goes here and here. This left, we'll say, is this block. Okay? So at each level, there's always going to be a corresponding left and right block at a particular level. Not necessarily on the queue, it could be allocated. Okay? When the correct left and right blocks come back into memory, we want to coalesce them, that is, make them bigger and move them one level up. Okay? Not always. We'll talk about high water and low water marks in a minute. Okay? But that allows us to push blocks back up the list. Okay? Also, it increases the chance that when I ask the queue above me for a block, that it actually has a block and doesn't have to go looking someplace else. So now, what does it mean for something to be a left and a right block? Okay, so I'm at a particular level of Q. I'm at Qn. Okay, n plus 1 is twice the size of me. So when I get a block from the address above, the Q above, what's going to happen is the following. You need to know. Okay, so let's say let's say the size of this is 2 to the n. Okay. That has some things that we need to know about how memory works. In order for this block to be efficient, this is going to have to be aligned to the n. So what that means is that all the bits lower than m have to be 0. Okay, because what we have is a block, and then all the bits after it are the index into the block, the offset, right? So the offset bits all have to be 0. And those offsets are just the rest of the addresses in the block, aren't they? Now, the bits to the left of it, we can't say anything about the bits to the left of it. Right? So what we're going to do now is take all those bits that are turned on out here. This is called the prefix. All right. So the prefix, when we break this block in half, the relationship of this now turns out that this second block now, it turns out this one is only aligned to 2 to the n minus 1. Right? It turns out the 2 to the m is also aligned to 2 to the m minus 1. So they're both set up for the next one down. The difference between the two of them is that now this prefix got one bigger, and it also includes this. So this one will be a 0, this one will be a 1. So the prefixes for a 2 to the m block on the next level down, okay, the prefix will be identical except for the last bit. One bit will be 0, one bit will be 1. Okay? Because this prefix is for this block, and this prefix is also for this block, and the next Q down, we extend the prefix one more bit, so this becomes part of the prefix for the next set down. Okay? Is anybody having fun with math now? Okay. Anybody want to go running, screaming into the night? Now, turns out that breaking these apart is trivial. Okay. Breaking them apart is really quite trivial, but putting them back together is not. Okay? And that's because the world is full, on any one Q, the world is full of left and right blocks. But not all of them on the free list. Okay? Not all of them are on the free list. Now, the way we know that we're a right block, okay, is the bit that's turned on, the lowest bit turned on is the same as the block size for our Q, isn't it? Does that make sense? Okay. So it turns out that the left is going to have a left is always going to have a 0. A right will always have a 1 in the bit position for the size of our Q. Okay, does that make sense? So, but we want to avoid the following. Okay, let's avoid the following. Can we coalesce these two? They happen to be next to each other in memory. Why can't we? They're next to each other. Once we coalesce them, they'll go up to the Q above us. But we don't want to do that. Why? Because right would be left, but what's bad about that? It turns out, this poor guy might wind up being completely abandoned. We need to put back the original block to the next higher level, or we risk fragmenting our memory. Because even though we're putting together two blocks that are adjacent, their originals will be a left here and a right here. We can't put those two together because they don't abut in memory. So it turns out coalescing and putting things back the way they were higher on the list, we have a problem unless we coalesce the original left and the original right. Okay? But how are we going to know what's the original left and what's the original right? Okay? A couple of things that we can do. In the background, when malloc is not running, we can go through and sort these lists based on memory address. Okay? And that's what we do. And actually, when we coalesce, we insert them back ordered. We use an insertion sort. We insert them right where they need to go. Relatively efficient. Now, how do we tell if two different blocks that are next to each other are adjacent and they're the correct left and right? Right? So this is important. So we can do this really, really fast. It turns out we can do it with two exclusive ORs. Okay? What we can do is take those two items that are adjacent in the list. We don't know if they're adjacent in memory. But if they're adjacent in the list, the prefix for the level above for both of those will be the same, won't they? The difference will be the last bit of the prefix for our current Q, right? And that's in the position that's the same size as our Q, isn't it? So it turns out if we exclusive OR two values, if there are the correct left and correct right, they'll have had the original prefixes the same, but they'll have that 0 and 1 in the extended prefix. So it turns out that's going to be the only bit that's turned on after the exclusive OR, isn't it? And now if I exclusive OR it by the size of my current list, what do I expect the result to be? How many people say non-zero? How many people say 0? How many people want to see how this magic trick works? All right. So what we've done by taking those two addresses and doing exclusive OR on them, if they're the same prefix for the size of the prefix for the Q above us, all that prefix goes away. because those bits will be identical, won't they? All right? But for the size Q we're currently on, all right, for the Q we're currently on, 1 is going to have a 0 in the bit position for my current Q size, and 1 is going to have a 1, isn't it? Okay? The size Q that we're on is only going to have 1 bit set. Okay? So it turns out that if exclusive OR a left and a right, and I'm trying to coalesce, the only bit that should be turned on after that exclusive OR is the size of the Q, the bit for the size of the Q. So if I exclusive OR that with the Q size, what do I expect the result to be? 0. If it's non-zero, what do I know? They're not buddies to each other. Okay. You should sit down and work that. You know, just pick a prefix, randomly change 1 bit in the prefix. Right? So they're not adjacent. Exclusive OR says that bit will stay, because we're going to exclusive OR in 1 bit position will be a 0, another bit position will be a 1. Okay? We're going to leave that bit turned on in the result. We exclusive OR with the size, that higher bit position is still going to be turned on because the size, corresponding bit position is going to be 0. When we exclusive OR, it'll stay 1. Which means that after we're done at the second exclusive OR, if it's not 0, they're not buddies. And notice that for any one entry in our list, we only have to check the 1 on either side of it if we put them in memory order. Okay. So you say this block right here, where's its buddy? I don't have to search the entire list. I look here to see if it's the lower buddy, or I look here to see if it's the higher buddy. That's the only place that it can be. Super fast.
So there were two XORs, do the 2 blocks together, and then with the current Q.
Yeah, so the 2 blocks, doing the 2 blocks together will tell us what bits are different between the 2. And remember, that offset is all going to be zeros. Okay, it's at the starting address. The difference between those 2 should just be the 0 and 1 there, which happens to correspond to the Q size. Okay? So the prefixes are the same, so those will go away in an XOR. But this bit and this bit will wind up being, when we XOR them, because one's a 0, one's a 1, it'll wind up being set. And then all the zeros below it will wind up still being zeros. Right? So now we only have 1 bit turned on, if they're a left and a right. If the 2 prefixes do not match, then some bits out there in that prefix, after we do take those 2 prefixes and do an exclusive OR, some of those bits will be turned on, won't they, if they don't match. Okay. And then we're going to exclusive OR just on this bit position, which is the size of the current Q. All right? And so if it's the size of the current Q, we expect that those bits are going to go are going to go away when we look at the Q's. Right? And then we'll see some bits in the prefix if they're not left and right buddies. So it'll be non-zero. Okay? So exclusive ORing the starting address of those 2 blocks, if they're left and right buddies, will leave us with the first bit isolated. Okay? The result, the bit will be turned on in that bit field. Okay, so we take the 2 addresses and exclusive OR them. Then we take the size and exclusive OR them, and if they are the same size, that 1 bit will be turned on. That's for my current size. If they're buddies, all the rest of the bits will be turned off. If they're not buddies, there will be other bits that are turned on, and that's why we compare against 0. 2 XORs. Okay. Really, really rather fast.